So what we're going to do today, and as I said, we're going to spend most of the vast majority of our time here in PerformancePoint, is we're going to show you how to build some of these different pieces of this dashboard and then combine them all together. And then I'll show you a little Excel sheet that I've got, and time permitting we'll actually embed that Excel worksheet inside of our PerformancePoint dashboard as well, so that we can use a combination of these technologies. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do whenever we're creating these dashboards, obviously we have to have a way to get to our data. So the first thing we're going to do is create a data source. After that, we're going to show you how to build a report, and then we're going to combine all that into a dashboard. So dashboards are basically built of reports, which are built off of data sources. And the other thing that we're going to hopefully put into our dashboard today is a filter. So that way our data isn't necessarily just static there on the screen. We can actually do some filtering of our data as well. Alrighty. So as I mentioned, we're going to be using the AdventureWorks dataset today. Everything that I'm going to be doing here is in SharePoint 2010. I'm just running a VM on this particular demo here that is running Server 2008 R2, and I've got SQL Server 2012 here in the background. So I've actually got a tabular instance as well as a multi-dimensional instance on this particular machine. So I have an Excel sheet here. I'll show you guys this Excel sheet, and then we'll come back to this a little bit later. So you'll notice that some of the things I have on here are I've got my customer geography hierarchy over here on my rows. On the columns, I've just got all the values. I have one of my KPIs in here as well. So I've got, this is a nice way to be able to mix KPIs that you may not necessarily have inside of your data set. You can build these inside of either right here inside of Excel or inside of the Power Pivot and display them on here. They don't necessarily have to come from your cube. In this case, they actually are. And then up here on the top, I have a filter that's using my calendar date. So like I said, just keep in mind some of the things that we have on here, mainly that calendar date and this customer geography, because those two will both come into play here a little bit later. Okay, here's our SharePoint site. This is just a blank Business Intelligence Center straight out of the box on, like I said, on SharePoint 2010 here. And what we're going to do is go over to our PerformancePoint content section. I actually do have one other dashboard that's out here on this site already, so once this page loads up, you'll actually notice that there is a little bit of data already inside of here. Well, it's taking its time to load. So once we get inside of our PerformancePoint content, or we could also go to our data connections, both of these are PerformancePoint content libraries. All the way down at the very bottom of the screen, you're going to see a link that says Add New Item. When you click on that, it's going to open what's called the SharePoint Dashboard Designer. And it's going to launch this particular application here. If you don't already have it on your computer, it'll actually download it directly from your SharePoint site. So all of our dashboard development is going to be done right here inside the Dashboard Designer. Excel work obviously is done inside the Excel user interface and then uploaded to the SharePoint site. And your reporting services reports, if you were to do any of that kind of development, would be done inside of the Business Intelligence Development Studio, which would be BIDS, or it would be done inside of Data Tools if you're using the 2012 version. So PerformancePoint is a part of SharePoint. It's not actually put onto your environment by default. You do have to go and create a service application for it. So keep that in mind whenever you are developing these, and then you have to also enable the site collection features for PerformancePoint. So all that stuff gets enabled by default whenever you install the service application or whenever you create that service application, but you do have to go and make that your first step, is to create the PerformancePoint service app inside Central Administration. Okay, so I mentioned the first thing that we're going to do today is we're going to create a data connection. So we're going to right-click up here on Data Connections and say that we want a new data source. And what I'm going to do over here in the background is actually open up my Data Connections library. So this was the screen that I was waiting to load just a minute ago. I mentioned if you want to create new content, just scroll all the way down to the bottom, click Add New Item, and then it'll launch you into your Dashboard Designer. So we're going to be pulling our data today from an Analysis Services cube. There's a lot of different options here. I mentioned that you can pull in data from tabular as well. So we're going to use SSAS, just a multi-dimensional version today. So So I'm going to click on that, wait for this to decide to refresh at some point here today. Of course, when you start doing live demos, everything decides to run really slowly for you. And what this is going to do right here, you'll notice I have my data connections and my performance point content. What this is actually going to do when I create that new data connection is add a new entry to my data connections library here. So you'll see already that it has that new data source created at 8:14 a.m. because my virtual machine is on Pacific time. And that's that data source that just got created right here inside of PerformancePoint, inside the dashboard designer. So it's called new data source. We can rename that here in a minute. We're going to pull all my data today from my local host /molap. So that's my multi-dimensional instance. And as I mentioned, we're going to pull this all out of the AdventureWorks cube. So I can test my connection all the way down here at the very bottom. Just click Test Connection. Everything is successful. I can go over here to my properties, and I can change the name of this. We'll call it ADW Cube for AdventureWorks Cube. And then I can even put a display folder. Now the display folder is purely for organizational purposes right here inside of the dashboard designer. So we'll call this webinar. And then I'm going to click the Save button up here at the top. You'll notice that the little pencil goes away. It creates a webinar folder. And if I go back to my data connections library, I refresh it. That's now called AdventureWorks. Notice it doesn't actually create a folder inside of here. If you look at the PerformancePoint content, I have the display folder on here. But it doesn't actually create subfolders inside of the library. It just creates the subfolders here inside of your environment, or inside the development environment. Okay, so we're going to also go over here to the Time tab because we're going to try to set up a little bit of time intelligence inside of our solution today. And what we're going to do is pick our time dimension from our drop-down, which is going to be date.date.calendar. And the reason I'm choosing calendar is because, if you remember, as I said, inside of our Excel sheet, we're using the calendar date there too. Choose the date that begins the year for the selected dimension. All we have to do is come over here and pick the first of any year. So we'll pick 2005, which is the beginning of our hierarchy, January 1. And then we have to tell it what level that corresponds to. So in this case, we chose down to the day level. If we only chose January of 2005, then this hierarchy level would be month. But in our case, we chose all the way down to the exact day.